Well, I'm really excited to welcome our guest speaker, Brandon Mull, today. If you haven't heard of Brandon Mull, I don't know what I can tell you. You should know about him. You should read his books. He is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Fablehaven, Beyonders, Five Kingdoms, and the Candy Shop Wars series, among others. So a raise of hands. Yeah, Dragon Watch, there it is. How many of you have read any Brandon Mull books? All right, how many of you have never read a Brandon Mull book? Okay, so you got some new audience here.
Yeah, that's right. I'll bring you over.
Yeah, that's right. A kinetic thinker, Brandon enjoys bouncy balls, squeezable stress toys, and popping bubble wrap. He lives in Utah in a happy little valley near the mouth of a canyon with his 4 children and a dog named Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Brandon loves meeting his readers and hearing about their experiences with his books. This is Brandon's 3rd stop of the day on his speaking tour. He's already been to the elementary school, the middle school, and we're so glad that he was able to squeeze us in here at Snow College. So please welcome Brandon Mull.
All right, guys. Well, I'm happy to be here with you. And it's kind of nice to be with an older crowd because I can talk in some different ways than I can at the elementary school, you know. I know this is kind of an entrepreneurial class. And so part of what I'll talk about is the business side of my job. But I'll also talk a little bit about why I do it and how I got into it, because that's kind of intrinsic or inherent to this kind of job, is how do you get started making money doing something so weird, right? There's different ways I can describe my job. One way I can describe my job is I go down into my basement and I pretend like I'm a 13-year-old girl talking to a centaur, and then I write that down, and then I come upstairs and I'm like, who wants to buy this? And when I think of my job that way, it's like, you have a weird job, man. Because I live in a house, you know what I mean? I pay bills with this job, right? So I went to San Diego Comic-Con one time, right? Can we hear me? The mic's better. Went to San Diego Comic-Con one time, and I got a chance to hear Peter Jackson talk about how he got into his job. And do we know who Peter Jackson is? He is the dude who directed Lord of the Rings, right? He directed the trilogy, and then he directed the Hobbit stuff, some other things, King Kong. But in the audience, someone asked, hey, how did you become the guy who directed Lord of the Rings? And he was like, well, there was the stuff I was into in high school, and I just stayed into it. And that was how he summed it up. And it's a little bit like that for my job. Like, there was the stuff I liked to read as a kid, and I just stayed into it. You know what I mean? Like I stayed into it till I became someone who could generate it and make it, right? To do a little bit of background, I have, there's 4 Mull kids. That's Sadie, Chase, Rose, and Calvin. We're all nerdy. Like, that's us dressed up as Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think that was for some Halloween. That's the family dog, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Buffy running with my daughter, Buffy eating my son. Some of my kids are kind of like my characters. One of my characters is a character named Seth in Fablehaven. He's a recklessly curious kid. And Chase didn't exist when I wrote Fablehaven, but I was like one of those curses where like you write about him and then your kid becomes that, you know? Or like your mom's like, I hope you get a kid just like you. Like that happened to me where I got a character just like my character. Here in this picture, you can see he like chimneyed up between the roof and the tree, got himself hanging on a little peg of a branch, way too high to make a clean landing with that angled roof beneath him. And he was with my brother Bryson, and my brother Bryson is who I based the character Seth on. So he got a picture of himself instead of help getting down. Eventually he did get down. This is my other kid, Calvin, his happiest day ever. And obviously I say that facetiously, but I like this picture for a reason. I'll tell you the reason. I put this picture up to remind me to say something about this. So I was at a book conference, and there's a children's book illustrator named David Small, who's an award-winning illustrator. And when you go to a book conference as an author, that's one of the scary things on the business side of your job, is there's a lot of books published every year. You go to a book conference that shows all the new books coming out, and you're like, how is anyone going to find my book when there's this ocean of new books every year, right? And it's part of the stress any author has is, how's anyone going to buy mine, right? Like, how are they going to find it? And I remember I was watching this dude, David Small, and he was going through reading picture books just endlessly because there was an endless supply, basically, right? All the new picture books for the year were there, so that was hundreds and hundreds of books. And patiently for hours, I just noticed this guy reading picture books, reading picture books. So I came up to him and I was like, what are you looking for? And he's like, I'm looking for life. And when he said that, I was like, I don't know what you mean. Like, it was like too Yoda kind of, right? Like, it was too deep. So I was like, what do you mean you're looking for life? And he's like, well, look, and he shows me a picture in the picture book of a house painter, and the house painter is leaning out on a ladder trying to paint into a corner. And as he's leaning out on the ladder, he's like hitching up his jeans in the back, right? Because his jeans are sagging on him, and he's reaching, and he's like, see how this dude's like hitching up his jeans as he leans off the ladder? He's like, the artist caught a little human moment that isn't the kind of thing you normally pose for, or maybe that you necessarily think of. He's like, but I'm looking for, how did these artists capture a little bit of humanity, a little bit of like a little human moment in a way that's innovative or fresh or different? And I was like, oh, you're looking for life in that way. Like, how did they catch a little life in the image? And it really helped me understand something more about my job. When I'm downstairs pretending I'm a 13-year-old girl talking to a centaur, my job is to bring that to life in a way that feels kind of authentic. And if I do, somebody might care about the conversation. They might get interested, right? If it leads to something interesting enough. And so it really, like, that conversation with David Small helped me put a name to something I'm trying to do as an artist, as a writer, is I'm trying to put some life into my stories. I'm trying to have something real inside the fiction, some real life, some real details that are inside what might be otherwise a make-believe story. I like this picture because it's an authentic picture with some life in it. We were at a rainy soccer game. The game was rained out. My son was all sad and bummed out because he wasn't going to get a play. And I caught a picture of him before he could fix his face and pretend to smile or something. And so I only like that picture because it's kind of an honest picture. It's got some life in it, not the kind of thing you usually pose for. I guess actually I'll back up for a sec. So part of having something to write about is living life and having experiences. My raw material as an author is, my basic raw material is words, right? But the raw material behind that is to have something to say with those words, right? To use those words to convey some details or convey some meaning. And part of that happens by living life and being a good observer of your life. So like when you're thinking on the business side, what's the commodity I have to sell? The commodity I have to sell is things I've observed that I can then dramatize and fictionalize, things that seem interesting to me. And it's a weird slippery commodity because it's only got value if someone else thinks it does, right? If someone else decides, oh, that book's nonsense and it's not worth reading, that could be true. You know what I mean? At least as far as how much money I make off it, that could be true. Or if someone says, oh, this book's awesome, like I'm going to tell a friend. That happens enough, yeah, you can make a living writing books, right? If you got a friend telling a friend, you sell enough books and you turn it into a job. And so for me, that kind of starts with this mix of observation and daydreaming, paying attention to the world around me and daydreaming about the stuff I see and trying to build something that to me seems worth sharing. We all live life. We all have the potential to draw from that a lot of stuff that we could share. That doesn't mean you will, but you have to kind of turn your observer brain on and notice your life, observe the situations you're in and take away something that's worth sharing, right? An example of that is probably the hardest thing I went through in my life so far. 7 years ago, I went through a divorce. To me, it was just agony. It was agony because sometimes people get divorced and both parties want it. In this case, I didn't want to get divorced. I was willing to work through whatever we had to work through. I had been faithful to my wife and I wanted to work through any problems we had. And she had reached a point where she was just done. And I don't get to control that, right? If she's done, she's done. And I tried to like, hey, can we reconcile? What can we do, right? And when she just it was just a hard pass, and she totally just went through with the divorce after 15 years of marriage and 4 kids or whatever. And I suddenly had to face this situation of, this is something I would not have chosen, something I did not choose, something that messes up most of the plans I had for my life, with the relationship I wanted to carry through my life, with the family situation I wanted to carry through my life. And it was like, what are you going to do now, man? Because inside I was dead, just done, like really done. Like I could understand why a deer would drag itself off to be alone before it dies, because that's how I felt. You know what I mean? I was like, let's drag me off to some place where I can just be alone. And I couldn't. I had kids. I still had to live. I had a job, right? So it was like this hard situation of, I want to be done, but there's still a lot of things worth living for in my life. You know, I just couldn't see it at the time because I was blinded by all the pain. But that is something I can use. You can use all that pain, right? You can use what you learn through the pain. And one of the things I learned from this, speaking in broad terms, was, yeah, sometimes things will happen in your life that you wouldn't choose, and the only thing to reasonably do is you muscle through, and you figure out how to get to the other side of it, and you figure out how to make your life better again, right? And so part of that for me was, a few years after my divorce, I met somebody amazing. Her name was Erlyn. She had also been through a divorce, and that's our engagement picture, because I'm nerdy, you know. So we got like an awesome, and she's nerdy enough that we went for it. And then that's our wedding picture. And now I have 11 kids. Because she had 7 and I had 4. And we were like, let's make a soccer team. And so, I mean, if you think of the practical side of life, things went from, I was kind of lonely and kind of sad. And it was like, whoa, now I am overloaded. Like almost went to the opposite extreme. But that was a good thing, because I like being a dad. And I hated being alone in that house when I was used to being a dad. And now there's a lot of people around, and they're slowly growing up. So we're losing some to college now and stuff. But it did bring a lot of life back into my life, and it did help me learn all sorts of hard lessons. And so it's an example of something I've been through, right? I will never write a story about that divorce. I don't think. I can't imagine. To me, it's not the kind of thing I want to write about. But it'll help me when I write a character who's in pain, because I've had some pain that like made me just want to be done. And that stuff I can use. You know what I mean? Like I can, and it's weird because it's useful in life too. When I meet somebody who's in terrible pain, and it might be from something really different, but for me, that was pain that was like, I'm done. Like that was that level pain. And so when I meet someone who's at that level pain, I can still kind of meet them there. And I know something about where they're at, right? And I can connect in ways that I couldn't before. I couldn't, because I hadn't been down that low before. And so there can be good that comes from bad, right? You can take some of the bad in your life and pull some good out of it sometimes, but you have to muscle through it. You have to hang in there, because there is the option of giving up. And if you give up, yeah, then you learn the lessons of giving up, which aren't great lessons, right? Usually you learn the lessons of giving up. Eventually you bottom out and you figure out how to pull back up, and then you learn the good lessons, right? Anyways, here's my kids rocking out, because it just makes me happy. He's got like abs drawn on and stuff. And the hair is awesome. I do that because like divorce is sad, music is fun. So yeah, I'll skip a couple of these things. I was like, my wife got in an accident. But so I read a bunch of books. When I was a young writer, I'll tell you what, I read Fablehaven. I read a series called Candy Shop or Pingo Picture Books, the Beyonders series, which is 3 books long. I created a series called Spirit Animals for Scholastic, which I wrote with a team of authors. The 5 Kingdoms series, which is 5 books long. And then my Dragon Watch series is my sequel series to Fablehaven. It's all kind of Harry Potter fantasy kind of books. When I say Harry Potter fantasy, not like adult, like totally adult fantasy like Brandon Sanderson might write. I'm more like young main character fantasy like Harry Potter was, right? Characters are young, but the books are thick and the stories are cool. That's what I'm trying to do, right? Dragon Watch was the book I most recently finished, the series. And here's a fair question. Why do I write fantasy stories? You know, how do you get started here? If you're gonna make money writing fantasy stories, in fact, let me just back up a second on that sentence. If you want to make money, writing books is a bad way. Like in general, it's generally speaking, a low probability investment. It's a bad way to make money. Can you make money writing books? Yes. Can you get rich writing books? Yes. Does it happen to everybody? No. It happens to most people. It does not happen to. And so it's one of those careers. There's some careers where you got to figure out, like, am I one of those guys that can make money here? Right? Because like there's people making money here, but it's not everybody. And I'll tell you who's not making money here almost completely, people who do it really casually. If it's something that's like, I want to make money, that seems like a good way. Like, yeah. If you're doing it casually, do something else. Because like it's really, really hard to succeed writing books. You have to stand out. You have to be like valedictorian of your class in writing books. Like you got to be like the top of the pyramid, or you're just not making money at it. And there are people who do. It's very much like trying to be a director. Like if my kid said, "Hey, Dad, I want to be a director," I'd be like, "Okay, I'm worried." Like as far as you making money, I'm worried. But if that kid's Steven Spielberg, hey, that was the right call. Steven Spielberg was not going to make $1 billion in another way, but he did do it by being a director, right? And so that's one of the things you're trying to do is assess what's my skill set and where do I stand out above the other kids? Where do I stand out above the other people, right? It's kind of like when I was in high school, I didn't do the basketball team. Why didn't I do the basketball team? I'm reasonably tall and basketball is pretty fun, but I didn't do the basketball team because I'm not that good at it. Like it didn't come very easy. And like as I practiced and tried to gauge my skill level, if I worked really hard, I maybe could have been like, my peak would have been being like a bench warmer on the basketball team. And for me, that just wasn't what I was after. Now, I could perform, and I was one of the better performers in the school. So I did drama, because on drama, I could have a big part in the play and kick some butt on stage and do a good job at that. I was better than my peers at it, right? And so I was like, do that then. And part of the reason I went into writing was my imagination kills. Like you could put me in a room with the best screenwriters, the best anybody, and I promise I've got a better imagination than them. Like I just do. I don't care who it is. And I have that level of confidence with it, and I'm not wrong. And if they think they have a better imagination, like poor them. Like what a small mind. Like read my body of work and think a little bit and show me what you've done and we'll figure it out. But like that I'm talking about a certain level of confidence at a certain ability, right? Like because I was that sure, I was like, I'll risk my life on this. Like that's how sure I am that everybody in my life was scared for me that I wanted to be a writer. Everybody, my parents, my teachers, my college professors, they're all like, no, that's not a good idea. You know what I mean? I was like, still, I'm going to do it. Part of it for me was prayer. Like I've got a relationship with God. And so I felt like God was on my side on this one. And the more I self-assessed, I was like, I think this is where I'm strong. So I charged hard with it, right? For me, where did it start? Where did writing fantasy start? It started with a lion. When I was a little kid, I lived in my head. I made up stories. That's how I entertained myself. Just put me alone in a room and leave me alone, and I will be the happiest guy around because I'm just making up stories in my head, fighting bad guys, doing whatever. I'm 5, right? I'm a little guy. And that never stopped. My head just makes up stories. If you put me in a car and put me in traffic, I make up stories. And I think everybody daydreams. Most people here, you daydream sometimes, right? At least. And you might be daydreaming about practical stuff. You might be daydreaming about maybe like the girlfriend or boyfriend you want, or you might be dreaming about the trip you're gonna take, or you might be dreaming, there's a million things you can daydream about. If you're me and you're stuck in traffic, I'm dreaming like, okay, well, what if 20 dwarves attacked a giant? How would that work? And what would it look like? Like, I think about nerdy stuff, but because I think about nerdy stuff all the time, that makes me a good fit for writing fantasy. For me, when I was a kid, I lived in my head. I would just make up stories nonstop. And I didn't want to really read anybody else's thick book because I thought they would be boring and I thought they would be less cool than what I had in my head. And a lot of time I was right. And so, but then someone gave me Narnia. And when I read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I was like, okay, maybe he's got a better imagination than me. Okay, like, or at least as good. This guy's got a good imagination. So I read Narnia and it's like, okay, now I get it. This is why we read books, because that expanded my imagination. I had never thought about crossing through some magical portal and going to another world and fighting the monsters there. My head hadn't gotten there yet. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, that's a possibility. And suddenly like richer, better daydreams for myself, right? I remember after reading Narnia, I desperately wanted that to come true. I went to my, oh yeah, that's me as a kid. Blue, boom, boom, boom. We gotta get to the lion picture. So I'd read about this lion, right, Aslan, and I wanted it to come true. And I went to my grandma's house, and my grandma was old, and she had a big closet. So I was like, maybe. And I remember like, this is all true. I pushed through the coats to the back of the closet, and at the rear of the closet, I found a tiny set of doors. And I was like, it's showtime. And I went in through those doors into a small room filled with canned peaches, which was just a huge disappointment. So for a brief while, I was Lord of the canned peaches, like guardian of the food storage or something. It was my sad little kingdom. What I wanted to happen was I wanted to go to another world, kill some monsters, become their king. That didn't happen. And so I would do that in my head, right? And that's where my story engine came from. I wanted to go to another world and fight monsters so bad, and I couldn't do it in real life, so I would just do it in my head. And for some reason, like Peter Jackson, I just kept doing it as I got older. You know, some people maybe outgrow certain types of daydreaming or this or that. Not me. The daydreams just got cooler. They got better. They got more elaborate. And there reached a point where the stories in my head seemed awesome. I was like, I have got to share these with people. You know, the feeling when you read a great book or you see a great movie, you're like, I got to show my friend, he'll love this, right? I had that feeling, but no way to share it. It was like I had this secret in my mind, these cool worlds, these cool stories. I had no way to share it. So I started trying to write them down. And at first, it was so incredibly frustrating. Because I told you, my imagination is kick butt. I'll beat up anybody with my imagination. But my writing, it was not kick butt. It was not good. Like I looked at what I wrote and I was like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm a simpleton. Because like this seems so cool in my head. But I write it down and I'm like, yeah, I got nothing. Like this is not cool. I compared it to my favorite books. Yeah, it wasn't good. And so I was like, okay, what have you guys ever had that experience where you have an idea you're trying to realize and then you're like so frustrated because you're like, wait, this is awesome, but I can't make it awesome. My picture looks bad. My story is lame. Like that was the feeling, right? And so I had to kind of look at that, and I still look at it, and I had to look at it and go, okay, my imagination rules, but am I ever going to be able to communicate it in a way that does it justice, right? So I started paying attention to how my favorite authors built their scenes. I noticed novels happen in scenes, one scene at a time. So I'd pay attention to how they built those scenes, and I practiced writing my own scenes. And over time, I got better at it. And I got closer to being able to say in words the cool stuff that was going on in my head. I still am not perfect at it. Every single book I've ever written is way cooler in my mind than what I break it down to in words, I promise. But at least I'm getting closer. At least I'm doing well enough that other people now will read it and go, oh, I see what you're saying. And that story's cool. Like I'm into it or whatever, at least enough that I can make a living at it. So my journey as a writer, it's like, again, we look at the financial side, the making money side, right? It's like, is this a battle I want to fight? To try to be one of those few guys who actually makes a living at this? It could have been a hobby. And I could have had a lot of joy with it as just a hobby. That would have been okay. But I wanted it to be my job. And it stressed me out when I was in college. When I was in your guys' shoes, for me, I was at BYU. I'm sitting there at BYU and I'm thinking, there's lots of stuff I could do. Really, am I going to put all my emphasis on writing? And the thing that scared me to death was, will anyone ever marry me? Because I really wanted to have a wife and I wanted to have kids. And I was like, what's my pitch? Like, hey, you should totally marry me. We will starve. We will absolutely starve. And if we have kids, they'll starve too. You know, and it was like, I was like, that's what it felt like. And it was like, I'll take that risk for me, but can I take that risk for like a family? I was like, I don't know, you know? And luckily I met a girl who was like, what do you want to do when you grow up? I was like, oh, maybe I'll get an MBA or something. She's like, you don't sound very enthusiastic about that. And I was like, well, what I really want to do is write books. Well, why don't you write books? Like, will you marry me? You know, like, not that fast, but more or less that's what happened. Yeah, like when I graduated from college, I took a break and wrote my first book. She gave me that break. We had just gotten married at the end of college. I wrote a book called The Other End of the Hippo, about a kid who got swallowed by a hippo into another world. And it was really weird, and I wrote it just for me. because I was like, early 20s. And so the character was early 20s. And like, what if I got swallowed by a hippo into another world? And it was a world with where all the heroes were like broken and dried up and washed up. And like, how do you become a hero in a world without heroes? And that became my Beyonders series later. But first, when I first wrote it, it was the other end of the hippo, and it was too weird. It was too like just for me. And so I tried to get it published. I had zero luck, right? And it was very stressful. And so what did I do? I believed enough in my ability to write books that I did train myself to be a writer in college. When I was at BYU, I ran a comedy troupe there called Divine Comedy, which was like comedy skits, like Saturday Night Live format. Really good writing practice, kind of like going to dialogue camp, right? Writing all these comedy skits. And it was a very successful comedy troupe. We'd sell 3,000 tickets a weekend to our comedy shows. And it was ridiculous because we were making tons of money, but we were organized as a school club, so we didn't get to keep any of it. It was really frustrating. We had to like give it away, basically, because like we made way too much money for what a club was supposed to be making. And so we'd like, what do we do with it? And we'd give it away to charity, or we'd like go eat it at restaurants and stuff. Like there was a few things they'd let us do to get the money down because it was way too much. And it was such a weird problem. Like, and then I had to go pay tuition. You know what I mean? Like, can we make scholarships? No. Can we do, like, we tried to think of all the reasonable things to do with the money. So like we found something that was making money, but we couldn't take advantage of it. But it did help me get some confidence that I could entertain an audience, because our reputation got really strong. And when our reputation was strong and we routinely would entertain the audience, they'd come back and demand just increased. We'd sell out against football games. We'd sell out whenever we wanted to put on a show. And we were charging $3 a ticket, so it was like a super cheap date. But if you sell 3,000 tickets, it's $9,000. And we needed to make some money because it was a school club. But like we still had to pay for the room. We had to pay for a sound guy. There was stuff we had to pay for. We were just over making too much money. It was so dumb. There's a group called BYUSA, which is like the student government thing at BYU. Just hated those guys because like they were so unreasonable. Like they would let us do nothing smart with the money and only dumb things with the money. And like they were like, well, for school clubs, you're allowed to have parties and buy food. And they're like, if you don't have less money in your bank account, we will shut you down. So you need to get rid of the money. And what can I do? Once a year, you can give it to charity, which we did. And they're like, or you can eat it at a club activity. So what do we do? Go to Ruby River Steakhouse, just buy everything on the menu ×5 or whatever. You know what I mean? Like we would buy every appetizer, everything. We'll get for those people. Like we're just throwing it all at Ruby River so that we could get it out of our bank account and they wouldn't shut us down. Like, would it have been more reasonable to let us make scholarships? Yes. Are they reasonable? No. Like, and so we sat there like starving students, just like the ribs or whatever, like right now, like eat our month's share or whatever. It was a really weird situation. Business-wise, it was an interesting model. When I started being in Divine Comedy, that comedy group, we were like half selling out. And the only way we were half selling out a show is doing it with an a cappella group too, to help draw an audience. And then it was just this thing of like me at the student center, like handing out flyers saying, we're better now. It's going to be awesome. Come to the show. We're better now. Like, because it existed before me, and after me, it was better. And it's not just me. It's also the guys that joined with me. Like there was a group of guys, and we made it better than it had been. And once it was better, word got out, and then we didn't have to do flyers anymore. But at first, it was like so much grassroots. Just please come watch me be funny for you. You know what I mean? So weird. And that's a big part of the business side of my job still, because here's the thing. Once you write a book, as a young writer, you're like, okay, this is all over if I can just get a book published. That's my goal. Just get a book published. I got to get started, got to get my start. And that seems like the big finish line. And then I got Fablehaven published. And it was like, for me, that was like, I finally did it. I finally published a book. And no one has ever heard of me. And no one cares at all, basically, right? And so I was like, okay, now what do I do? And then now what do I do is basically like I had a publisher, Shadow Mountain, who was a division of Deseret Book, a Utah publisher. They were trying to finally do mainstream books for a general audience. I was one of their first titles that they did as a mainstream imprint. And it was like go out and visit schools and talk to people and get in front of people at libraries and bookstores. And so I just worked my butt off to get in front of people at schools and bookstores and libraries. And what did I have to do that? I had to make a really good presentation because no one knew who the heck I was. So no one would care to have me because of my name, because I was a brand new guy, right? Like it's like a random dude shows up, hey, I wrote a book about fairies. Like you should totally have me in front of your kids, you know? It's like, should I? You know? Like, I was like, no, I promise it's good. We'll talk about reading and stuff. But when they finally say yes and let you do it, you got to present your butt off. You got to present something awesome where they're like, wow, you know, we might not know who he is, but at least he brought a good message and it was smart and it was useful. And so you make a really good presentation and then you just wash, rinse, and repeat. Do that presentation over and over and over for lots of different people. Try to get the word out. You can't have a fire until some sparks catch. So you're just trying to send out a bunch of sparks to try to get something started. On the money side of my job, I make about $2 if I sell a hardcover book when I'm working with a traditional publisher. I make about 50 cents when I sell a softcover book. If I don't sell a lot of books, it's a lemonade stand. I'm like a little kid by the side of the road, right? But if you sell 100,000 hardcovers, that's $200,000 for the year. A fella can live on that, right? And so you're trying to build awareness and an audience. Like for me, my job security isn't my publisher. My job security is my audience. If there's like, it was the same thing with Divine Comedy. There's a bunch of college kids who were like, for $3, or like if they've got a date for $6, I can go on a date and it's actually funny and good. Like I'm in, you know, and then it's really easy to sell out shows once enough people believe that. But it's so funny to be selling out shows when you think back, you're like, I used to be begging people in the student center to give it a try, right? You know, I was like begging them. And so a lot of times in entertainment, if you want to succeed, it's kind of like planning your own birthday party, right? Like, but let's say you want a birthday party, and the nicest thing is for someone to do what? Throw you a book. I'd love it if someone threw me a birthday party, right? Like that'd be great. And let's say you want a birthday party, but no one's throwing you a birthday party. Option B is, hey, plan your own birthday party. If you really want a birthday party, plan it and make it happen. And then you can make it exactly how you want. And as a writer, I felt like a lot of times I had to plan my own birthday party. Like tell them that they really need to read this book and like try to make a case to it for enough people until there's a little bit of momentum to it. And at the end of the day, here's the thing, I promise this is true. At the end of the day, if someone reads your book and they like it enough, which takes quite a bit, right? Because if you're gonna read a book for fun, that means you spent your time and your money on it, right? Maybe not the money if you did it at the library, but you definitely spent some time, right? 8 hours, 12 hours, whatever it takes. And then also often you spend some money. So if someone spends their money and their time to read the book, and after having done that, goes, wow, that was good enough that I'm gonna recommend it to a friend. If that is true, you will have a career. If that is not true, you will not. Because with all that grassroots and all that trying hard to plan my own birthday party, I can only rope in a certain amount of people from an indifferent public, right? Like only a certain amount of people are gonna go, okay, well, this guy seems earnest and like, the premise sounds kind of cool, so maybe I'll give it a try. You get a few of those people to read it. That's a few sparks starting, but everything depends on, does that guy tell someone else? Does that guy tell someone else? And if friends tell friends and people tell family members, boom, that can really quickly turn into a big deal where you're making real money. That's what happened with Fablehaven. It took me so long to get published, took me forever, felt like. I'm used to succeeding at the stuff I try. Why am I used to succeeding at the stuff I try? I try to pick the stuff I'm good at to try. You know what I mean? Like if I'm not good, I usually don't try, at least unless I'm pretty good. Like I don't want to enter a talent show and be in the bottom third. Like I'll just not be in the show. But like if I could be in the top third, yeah, I'll enter that talent show, right? And so that's a little bit what I was doing with writing. It was like a little miracle after I published Fablehaven. That thing I was talking about, it did happen. People told people, and pretty soon, by book 2, I was on the New York Times list, which wasn't something even the publisher forecasted. Pretty soon, Simon & Schuster is publishing my paperbacks while Shadow Mountain does the hardbacks. Pretty soon, I've got an agent in New York who's the president of a company of an agency called Writers House, which is a really prestigious agency. And I've got a guy at Creative Artists Agency in LA trying to sell movie rights. And it's like, it goes from something being like just me pushing this dream to other people helping me bring a dream into reality, right? But that kind of stuff, the creative endeavor, it's incredibly entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurial meaning self-starting. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, I'm the guy that makes it happen. Like, because I'm creating the product, marketing the product. And if in my career, if I had just trusted my publishers, I might not have a career. But I'm the dude who goes and hands out the flyers at the center so that my comedy show has an audience. And I'm the dude that goes out 5 months out of the year for the first 10 years of my career to get in front of schools and libraries to make sure I have a readership, right? And I still do it. I'm doing it today. You know what I mean? Like getting in front of people. If I don't wear my promoter hat sometimes, sales can get more anemic. So sometimes I got to put on that promoter hat and go plan my own birthday party again. And also there's a giving back side to my job. Writer job is a hermit job. You know what I mean? Like I am as close to a hermit job as possible. When COVID hit and everyone's like, oh, I have to work from home. I was like, yeah, welcome to the club, guys. Like, that's my whole life. That's all I do is I sit alone in a room and make up awesome stuff but have nobody to talk to. And like, in a way, it's sort of a bummer job because I used to work writing marketing stuff at a company. That was like in the in-between as I was trying to get the writing thing up on its feet. And it wasn't like the greatest job, but at least I had coworkers and I had some friends and I could goof around and send dumb memes to each other. And like, I could still sort of do that, but it was way easier in a workplace. And so I miss that side. I still miss that side. But I like this side because I get in front of people and then that keeps owls from growing in my beard or whatever. Like it's, because it is a hermit job in a lot of ways. So I like that I get to get out and do a promoter side of my job. Partly so I stay connected to readers and I stay connected to kids and stay connected to life and humans because I'm alone a lot. Anyways, that gives you some basics on some of the stuff I had to think through and that I do think through. Like I always, my mantra with my job is no one cares more than me. I have to be my own best marketer. And when I do that, when I bring that to the publishers, they see that and they get excited about that. And it's often hard for authors to get publishers to fund their book tours. I never had trouble with it. Why? Because I'm good at it. Like they send me out and I bring a really good presentation and I work my butt off and I do a good job. And you do that and they're like, yeah, we'll send this guy out. You know, even when they're not sending anyone else, when they're not funding anyone else's book tour, they'll fund me. I've been funded every year that I've ever written a book. And it's because of that, because you do a good job and people will invest in you. You know what I mean? And they see when they invest in me, I do a good enough job that they get return on that investment. Boom. Then they're interested. Then they'll fund me next time. My job security is my audience. I'm in a job, like sometimes the people who are like, don't become a writer, it's like such a dangerous career. It's like, well, I like a lot of people I know who had stable careers and you reach a certain point in your career and you lose your job and they're driving Uber. Like they go backwards to a place that they didn't want to be at. And like driving Uber's fine if that's your thing, but like I'm talking about dudes that are high level in pharmaceutical company and they're like, I'm a sales director and that's who I am. And then they can't do it anymore at 50 and they're driving Uber. And I meet these guys because they drive my Ubers sometimes. And my dad was one of these guys. Like he really was. And it's like, you never know what's going to be secure. There's a great thing by Jim Carrey where he talks about his dad. Do you guys know that thing? It's like a meme. So Jim Carrey's dad was like, he was a comedian too, but his dad was trying to do something safe, like I think like insurance or something, right? And so he got fired from his safe insurance job and they had all sorts of hard years. And Jim Carrey looks back on that and goes, my dad did insurance because it was safe, but it wasn't safe. And he could have failed at something he loved instead of failing at something he hated. Does that make sense? And maybe the thing he loved, because he loved it, maybe he wouldn't have failed at that, right? When I talk about why to be a writer or why to do something creative, there's a famous quote of like, write what you know. Have we heard that one? Write what you know. It's a good idea. It's a good principle because if you write about something you know about, you're going to do a better job, right? But it doesn't really fit fantasy very well because I write about dragons and monsters and unicorns and stuff. And do I know that? Kind of. I know it from imagining it. I know it from watching movies. I've never like petted my unicorn or whatever. You know what I mean? And so it's like, I change it to write what you love. Because if you write what you love, I think it's more powerful than write what you know anyway. For some reason, I love dragons and monsters and adventures. And because I love it, because I'm nerdily into it, I do a good job and I make it feel real. People read the books and they're like, oh, that's kind of awesome. Maybe that is what it would be like to be the caretaker of a secret wildlife park for magical creatures, or whatever the book is. That's Fablehaven premise. If you write what you know, or if you write what you love, or if you do what you love, you tend to be passionate about it and you tend to get good at it. And those are the dudes who get to the top of the pyramid and can succeed even in a weird industry like writing fantasy novels. Is that making sense? Guys, I would be happy to take a few questions. I know we're almost out of time. Any questions? Anything you want? Yeah. How do I get the art? I get partnered with artists by the publisher. So when you do traditional publishing, they usually prefer to partner you with an artist so it can have the exact look that they think will sell. And so I didn't have to worry about it really. Like I just had to write a really good book, and then I'm with the publisher. They let me have some involvement on, is this cool? Does this match? But mostly it was them finding for Fablehaven, a really talented guy named Brandon Dorman, who did all my interiors, all my covers. We're still working together. We've been working together 20 years. He's an illustrator and a dentist. Doesn't need to be a dentist. He makes enough money with illustration, but he just wanted to be a dentist too, I guess. Like that elf in Rudolph, I guess. I don't know. Anyone else? Questions? Yes. Super time consuming. Here's the time consuming. Tons of thinking. For me, it's like that story world has to come to life in my mind, like the best movie ever in my head before I even want to start. Because I want to have the confidence that I've got something to write about. So that's just tons of thinking. For me, that kind of happens automatically in the shower, in a boring class, in traffic, whatever. My head goes to making up a story. Once I have a good story though, tons of time to get that on the page, right? What's the first good scene to tell the story? What's the next good scene? That's about 5 months to write the draft. And then after that, that's 5 months full time. And then after that, all the editing, right? And then all the promoting to let people know it exists. And so like, it takes a lot of time. Yeah, it's not a lazy man's job or a lazy woman's job. It's the kind of job where if you're not going to be like a self-starter and really push hard, it'd be impossible to do it. Because like, there's no one babysitting me on, are you really writing this book? The deadline's coming. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, no, the deadline gets there, you got to be done. And you can't do it the last night or the last week. It's an emergency when you're 3 months out. You're like, that's when you're not sleeping. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, yeah, like very time intensive, lots of hours, but I love the hours. It's work I like. I would almost do it as a hobby. And so that's a big compensation, right? As I make more money, I can take my foot off the throttle a little bit, but adding 7 kids always adds a little stress, right? Like, so I still have to write, or, you know, I wouldn't make it through a year if I didn't write a new book. Anything else? Yeah.
When you were like coming up with the like storylines for your stories, and you can't figure out what comes next after a particular scene, how do you get through?
Yeah, there's a couple things I go home to. One is I have to make sure I understand the trouble in the story, because we're progressing characters through encountering trouble, dealing with trouble, and either overcoming or being defeated by the trouble. So am I moving through that trouble in a logical way is one of the places I go, right? Also go to, is there enough trouble? In general, in a novel, if there's not pretty big problems and pretty constant, it gets boring fast. And so often it's like, do I need to add some trouble or some obstacles to the characters? Often that brings some life into the story. As far as having ideas, knock on wood, thank you, heaven, like I have more ideas than I can ever use. My brain is like Old Faithful of ideas that just geysering up all the time. So it's more sorting. Like what's a really good idea that makes sense here? What's a great transition into a next moment? I stress and fret over those transitions like crazy. Okay, maybe one last question. Yeah.
What is your experience with online reading? Is it better than books?
So online books, ebooks, apps, and stuff. So I'm delighted if someone wants to read my book on an e-reader or Audible or whatever. I don't care how they get it. Like I'm cool with whatever. For me personally, I love, if I really like a book, I like to hold the book in my hand. To me, that's the high fidelity version of the experience, like to have the book, the paper book. I like that personally. Part of the reason I like that is I live my life on screens. Like I'm typing on screens all day. I write my books on computer. And so when I'm reading for fun, I want to get away from a screen because I've just been looking at a screen all day, right? But as far as someone else, I don't. If you would read it in a book, if they read it online, I don't care. I get paid either way. If unless you pirated it. If you pirated it, shame on you. We're starving out here, But yeah. Do you have a follow up?
What do they say in percentage? Which is more popular?
Yeah, I still sell more physical books than ebooks. That's not true in every category. I think a lot of the adult categories sell more ebooks than physical. But for some reason, there's something with this young reader category where it's kind of Harry Potter, kind of in between, like middle school kids, that kind of thing. We still sell more physical books than we do ebooks, but we're happy for any sales we get. You know what I mean? But I like that because I think the book's cool. It's fun to hold, fun to have. You guys, you asked good questions. I hope I presented something that was useful. Thank you for being a good audience. Appreciate your time.